welcome back to another development log. This is number 56. I don't think I'll be doing a little demo today because I really don't have a lot of completed work to be showing off in general. Um, but I did do a lot of work. It's just right now the state of the character controller that I've done a lot of work in is kind of in a state of disarray, so it's really, I can talk about it, but I really can't show too much because things are broken. But I'll go ahead and talk about what I did this week. Um, so I went and fixed up the rest of the animations for pistol, like the aiming and running while aiming and stuff like that. Make sure everything looks good. That's fine. So on Monday, I spotted a couple issues with the coats, the coat and the pants. That was really been bugging me. When you're crouching and stuff, especially when you're crouching and walking, you get so much of this. You get so much of this bleed through on the on the on the coat, especially for things like this. Um, you get the inner coat bleed through, and that was no good. So especially like while running and stuff, you get the orange inner layer. It would just totally bleed through the outer. I would just look like crap, and I had to do something about it. Plus, also when I was doing like jumping around, like cartwheels and stuff, you can actually see it here. I had cut back the inner mesh a little bit too far, and this whole part here is like pretty much blank, empty mesh. So I kind of had to go back in and add this pants back. I had to strike a balance to where I have enough to show here, but it's still kind of missing in the back end. How it actually is. So I reworked it to move it up higher, so there still is missing, but it's not gonna be you'll be able to see it through the code now. But anyways, one last effort in Blender to get things right, and one last rework, and I think I was finally satisfied with it. Like, I was concerned. I wanted the inner coat to have this the orange or whatever, but I found that with geometry it's just too much of a mess. Like, even with weight painting, it just doesn't, it's not consistent when it's moving around. I guess it's just one of the drawbacks of Magica cloth. Like, maybe if I had like bones instead of something else, I would get a more consistent result. But I was getting a lot of like something like this. You get a lot of this bleed through, but it was just like the inner layer. But so I cleaned all that up, and I think it looks pretty good. Like, when you're rendering both by default, it's just like a gray, just like the inside of this. But I think it's perfectly fine, and it looks a lot better in my opinion. So fix that up. So after all that was done, I started working on dual pistol functionality, right? And up until this point, adding weapons, it all follows the same paradigm of like a single weapon, and Invector system was built off this assumption, and that's fine. It seems like there was some effort to kind of start with a concept of like a dual weapon functionality in Vector, but it really wasn't fleshed out, and it really was not complete in any sort of you know in any sort of sense. So diving into it, like, I was like, oh, is there actually functionality included to support some sort of dual weapon, like a dual pistol? And the answer is clearly no. I've been through all of the system, and like, doing like a dual pistol. Well, so here's the dual pistol. Oops. Yeah, here's the dual pistol clip right here. So, he had a fun little, you know, a fun little flare, and so essentially, I spent the next couple days implementing the dual pistol functionality, and I had to get deep within the system and really kind of refactor, reprogram, not refactor, but add new functionality to support this concept of a dual pistol, right? So, getting really technical in the way Vector works, I had to go in and kind of I had to add a new item. I bought a new little package that allowed me to actually create icons, PNG icons now from the actual 3D objects. Instead of using the out of the box, I can actually make icons from the actual pistol, which is cool. So I made a new item here, set it all up, and the idea is to have this item, right? But instead of an item that's gun, so the equipment attached to the gun is like a dual pistol. So I had to go through the effort of all the technical bits of setting up an extra you know, a handler point on the left hand, and you know, everything that's, you know, involved. And I really had to set up extra cases, you know, separate cases along the entire process to kind of make sure and just test and test. So this, you know, this was a bit of functionality that was not included. I had to implement alongside, you know, single, and I had to make the system accommodate both a single equip and a dual weapon equip, and I had to set up the weapons in a way to kind of, you know, set up properties to say, yes, this is a dual weapon, and you should, you know, treat, you know, it's a separate behavior. So a lot of coding to tell, you know, like to handle this sort of situation correctly, right? Where you're, you know, so a lot of work, a lot of complexity, and like a lot of things where it's like, how do you handle IK in this situation? And I have two different weapons, two different weapon data, but I think the right weapon actually controls and handles all the data for the two positions of the guns and the two positions of the hands for the IK and all the rest. So I kind of simplified it down. Instead of, you know, each weapon holding its own hand IK, that would complicate it too much. But anyways, so the right one's the controller. But after a lot of work, it all came together, and it's a system that can actually handle. So no functionality in the box. I had to create this on my own, but now we have a concept of dual wield in this, and that was a good chunk of the week getting that done. But it is, it's functional now. So a lot of coding, a lot of testing. Along the way, I was taking care of a lot of issues. I noticed that the single pistol equip was off. Worked on that, but that's kind of irrelevant. Just any issues that I spot along the way, I just like make sure I fix up. So a lot of work with the animator and animations. But this was Tuesday. By end of Tuesday, I was able to implement the basic, dual pistol functionality, but I was still having. There's still data structures issues with switching around weapons. Like if I had the dual pistol and I switched the pistol, then back to the dual pistol, the actual system mechanics would not actually dismiss or create or dismiss or swap around the weapons correctly. Things were happening like dual pistols were being created. Were being created in duplicate and not working properly. What really was the issue, like it was in the code, is actually the underlying data structure that the system was built upon. It uses like a dictionary to track whether, like the cache, and to track whether or not a weapon's being equipped, so it doesn't have to recreate it every time. So the main thing I eventually had to do, I had no other way around this. Like, so dual pistols, I had to associate 2 weapons with 1 item. And instead of just a single key for an item and a value weapon equipment, I had to change it to like an array of weapon equipments. Like, so if it's just a single, it'll have an array of 1. If it's 2, it can actually handle that sort of thing. So I had to refactor the base data structure. There's just no other way around it. The way that Vector built it. So I had to. That was another piece of work in order to get the actual. In order to get the actual weapon swapping working. Right now, I got a bunch of weird animation issues, but what it does do, if you switch between weapons now, it does properly switch the actual game objects to their respective, like the equipment container. You can see, yeah, they're in here disabled. And then the right weapon has actually gone to the right holder within the armature. So, yep, had to fix that up. And yeah, new weapon for the dual pistol, which means new, what's it, SO, serialized object, or yeah, new states, new SO data for the new object to control all the IK, and got the IK working, equip and unequip. Fixing one small thing after the pieces starting to come together on Thursday. And so I got the pistol working pretty good. I went back to the rifle animation. There's something when I was supporting, making a lot of changes, supporting the dual pistol. That's the thing. I kind of changed the system around, and it kind of broke the functionality for equipping the rifle. So all of a sudden, the rifle equip was off. But so I had to go back and fix that, and just kind of fixing all these problems as I go. That's the problem. Like, when you refactor the system, you add new functionality, you change things, you're always breaking things that depend on that system, and that's just the name of the game. So on Thursday, like I discussed, I tackled the underlying code system problem of switching between weapons. And then so I was working on, what was it, Thursday? I was working on what happens when I was working on what happens when you are crouched, because now I have the crouch state, and I actually had the jumping state as well. So how does the IK look for each weapon when you're crouched and crouched aiming? So I actually had to add some new animation states to actually describe and address the IK positioning for each weapon, when you're crouched, just to adjust it a little bit. The default positions didn't look good as compared to standing. So now I have new states for crouching. And I was doing a bunch of testing about also what happens, not just for the guns when you're crouching and aiming, but also when you have a weapon equipped. What happens when you jump, right? What happens when you're aiming and you jump? Things like this with a new functionality. How does the IK look? And I had to kind of adjust. Okay, when you do a jump, then lerp off the actual IK, lerp off the aim. And I did a lot of testing, and I got to a point where it was looking pretty good for when you're doing jumping around. So considering that, the problem was I got to a certain point And I'll continue working on that. But I was really noticing through this whole process of working on character controller a a continuing issue going on. Previously, I had this main character controller object. You can see the legacy one, and throughout this testing, I would want to do like have this player debug. Click a button, equip a rifle without having to pick up the controller. But this was just one of many components in the main character game object, and you can see there's just over time there's just a ton of components, right? Just more and more components, and usually I wouldn't care, but the problem with Unity is that it kind of has a limit. After some time, which I found out now, it's like if you have too many components, it tries to. I don't know what it tries to keep all this in memory or something, and what it happens is it really slows down the editor, really slows down the frame rate. So, in my testing, I was having to have like one thing open here, and I was having to actually move components out to separate objects just so I could test without having the main controller game object open in the inspector, because as soon as you have this open in the inspector, the frame rate just dies, and it's just really annoying. And sometimes you just can't avoid it, like, oh, I need to actually monitor the full body IK weight or for a test, and you have to have it open. So it was really impeding on my testing, and it's just like this thing is just getting too bloated, too unorganized, and it just came to a point it's like I had enough. So it's time to refactor. It's time to reorganize. So I bit the bullet, and I started chopping up the components of the main character game object. So I left all the essentials that should be on the root of the game object, like the system stuff, and I pretty much created like a singleton with access to references of all the components, and I organized all the components into their own game objects, their own child game objects, right? And so I spent most of the day on Friday fixing all these reference errors, but that only goes so far until you get to runtime. Then I started just fixing runtime errors, just basically rebuilding the character controller, from the ground up. Nothing was working, everything was broken, and I pretty much got it to a state where, like, okay, movement's working again. There's a lot of tricky things, like the Invector character controller, and a lot of these Invector-based components, they really assume that all these should be on the root level, because they make assumptions. So the biggest problem was in my code was, and even implementing myself, was the assumption of get component. Like, I make all these reference calls to get component. Well, that's true if everything's on the root game object. Everything, you're assuming where these components are, and all that was broken. So I had to go through each and every one of these classes, kind of fix those references, the get component. The tricky one was these Invector ones that I didn't write. It would have context reference like transform dot rotate equals, which assumes that it's modifying its transform on the root object, but I moved this out of the root object, so it would be controlling this object and not the actual rotation of the character object. So things like that I had to go through with a fine-tooth comb and make sure that, like, context statements of the actual game object position, are not there anymore. So chasing down a lot of ghost issues, and I'm still not there yet. There were a lot of things that were working and a lot of things that are popping up. I'm testing all this other functionality. I basically have to retest everything now that I refactored the components. But things that were working, like what was it, jumping? As you can see, like there's something odd with the root. It's not it's not allowing me to have rigid body movement. There's just a lot of little things that I noticed, you know. So I kind of have to get it back to where it was. But you know, I wouldn't have done this if it wasn't necessary. Like from my experience, like I would have built it a different way. Like in this way, if I knew it was going to be an issue for Unity to have a game, it would not be able to run a game object with so many components. I would have done differently. But since I found out this problem, I eventually had to take care of this problem eventually, and it's just the way it has to be. So now I have, and doing basic testing now, it's actually a lot nicer. I can, you know, if I need to something in the character controller, I can bring up this window or whatever I need. If I'm working at input or inventory, I can be in a relevant game object and not slow down the editor at all because it doesn't have everything else open. So it definitely solves a problem, but I would rather not have to refactor all the references. There's a lot of sneaky little things too, like um, some of these components have in editor references, like you just wouldn't know about. Like these are the sneaky ones where it's like um, you have these editor references. If you move game objects around, all of a sudden they're lost, and it doesn't tell you about it. You know what I'm saying? It's just like oh yeah, it's you know, it's missing. I guess that's what Odin Inspector is for or something, but it's not really helpful right now, and I'm not even sure where it went. But anyway, it's going to be more work to get this character controller looking like its old self again. It's mostly there, but right now it's kind of in a kind of a sort of a broken state. But anyways, that's just par for the course and more work to be done. So next week, pretty much, if I get this fixed up, it's going to be pretty much working on it's going to be working on like aiming and firing for all the weapons, including the new dual pistol weapon. Validating that, making sure that's still working, and making sure like aim assist is still working. Make sure, yeah, aiming and firing. That's what we're looking forward to next week. So more work to be done, and that's about all I have for this week. And we'll wrap it up here, and we'll see you on the next one.